Hello casters, today I'm going to be going over my set review for the upcoming Moonrise Expansion. We have the full set revealed so we can have full context of what cards we have available, and this is going to be a really impactful set, I think. Pre-orders are currently open, so you can get the booster boxes, the starter decks, all the other stuff, and the items are expected to ship out on the 21st of January. Starting off with our Omni runes then, and we have Divine Healing. This costs 1 spirit and allows us to enchant 3 spirits from your underworld to a Divine rune on your field. This provides the same amount of healing as an Ambrosia, but rather than going to your spirit deck, it has to go onto a Divine rune on your field. Of course, you can then pull spirits off your Divine rune for Nexus plays, which is big upside, or you could use those spirits to play further invoke runes in hand. So this is by no means going to be replacing Ambrosia as that staple healing option in our decks, but could be sort of additional copies going into certain decks that don't naturally have decent healers within the list. I think Earth Nexus is definitely one of those archetypes that's yearning for an extra heal card, and Demeter is already like a linchpin card within that archetype, so it wouldn't surprise me if we saw one Divine Healing coming into that list. Additionally, we've seen recently quite an interesting archetype known as Scrap, where it's utilizing both Kinleo and Equilinx and a couple of different Divine runes in the 60, and has actually access to a couple different Divine runes. In this case, you can have the wrong Divine rune in hand and use Divine Healing to put the right spirits onto your Divine rune no matter what it is, and make sure that you're getting Kinleo or Equilinx activation. Essentially, the mantra around that archetype is that Lynx and Kinleo are some of the biggest payoff cards in the game right now. Just brute forcing your way to make these effects trigger as much as possible is the win condition of that approach, and a Divine Healing could be a really good include into that archetype. The one thing I do bear in mind is that this is just an additional clunky piece that only gets working when you have Divine runes in play. There are a number of archetypes that can shut down your runes, so I never expect this to be in high counts in decks. Maybe a 1 in the side, maybe 1 in the main. That's really all I'm expecting for this card. Going on to Spoiled Fruit, this is an Omni counter rune for 1 spirit, and it can only be cast when an opponent activates a card effect that returns 1 or more spirits from their underworld to their spirit deck. You negate that effect and destroy that card. This is a really interesting one actually, because Ambrosia is a 3 of in every deck, and I don't think Spoiled Fruit changes that. So I think Spoiled Fruit could be that weird one-of include into decks just because it can block an Ambrosia from the opponents and completely ruin their game plan. At the same time, this feels like a fantastic sideboard option to a heal deck where there's lots of Sluggle, Quackle, Dratogwa, all these sorts of cards. We could just have 3 copies of Spoiled Fruit and suddenly you're starting to beat the heal stall strategies. I do think it's a bit ambitious to expect this to be a main deck option, but possibly some burning strategies with lots of Scorpions and whatnot could look to have 1 copy of this card. It seems way too clunky to play multiple of them, but because there's always Ambro, you can punish many opponents. Getting on to the Lunar core package then, of course Moonrise is all about Lunar. We have a lot of Lunar cards to go over today. The Divine Rune is Artemis. For 1 Lunar, when you cast this you can enchant up to 3 more Lunar, and you can disenchant a Lunar from this Artemis in order to target an opponent's face-up card and suppress it until that opponent's next end phase. This actually has a lot of applications. You're not just going to be suppressing Elestrals here, you can also suppress Stadium runes if need be. So it can be an interesting way for you to beat over certain opposing Elestrals that give themselves buffs, or stat changes, those sorts of cards, like Moss Station or Galaxy. And there's a few archetypes actually in Lunar that would like to have this card, just as a Nexus bank to pull spirits off of, so I do think this is going to see a decent amount of play. For the artifact, we have the Burr of Artemis, which is costing just 1 Lunar Spirit, and the Empowered Elestral deals piercing damage, and when the Empowered Elestral declares an attack, you can Nexus 1 Lunar from your Artemis to the Empowered Elestral. Even at a 1 cost, because we don't gain any stat changes, I don't feel like this bow is that versatile. And honestly, Lunar doesn't really fit that category of trying to aggressively chase down the opponent's spirit deck, so I don't think the bow naturally fits in a Lunar archetype. And finally, Temple of the Moon, this is just the Lunar copy and paste where we're gaining +1 attack, +1 defense for each Lunar enchanting them. But stadiums are really important in the metagame right now, and I do think there are a couple of Lunar archetypes that will try and have a couple copies in their main deck. Moving on to the Elestrals then, we start off with the Voldusk Ascension line, starting with the 1 Spirit Elestral. It's just a 1/5 body, and when you cast a Lunar phase, you can draw a card or return a Lunar Spirit from your underworld to your spirit deck, and this can be activated only twice each turn. In order to fully appreciate the power of this card, let's jump straight to those Lunar phases. So there are 8 Lunar phase cards in this set. The 4 at the top are Invoke runes, and the 4 at the bottom are Counter runes. And remember, when you're casting these Lunar phase cards, if there is a Voldusk on the board, you can either draw a card or return a Lunar Spirit from your underworld to your spirit deck just on their activation alone. You can always think about them as having a discount on them, or also stapling a draw 1 effect onto them if you already have that Voldusk on board. Naturally, we're going to see some of the synergies within the Lunar phase cards in a moment, But this deck is going to play vastly differently from basically every other deck in Elestrals, because all of those standard ratios of usual counter runes and invokes that go in the majority of deck lists are probably just going to be replaced by having a huge number of these Lunar Phase cards in there and really building towards that Voldusk and maybe even Werepup as well, where we're trying to get multiple activations of these cards alongside a Voldusk on your board. So we start motoring through the deck and getting lots of cards and trying to build towards a combo. For now though, let's start going over what these Lunar Phase cards do. Starting in the top left, we have New Moon, where you target an Elestral on the field and suppress it until the end phase. You may expend one Lunar equal to the targeted card's enchantment cost and discard a Lunar Phase. If you do, destroy it. So this can be considered an expensive Earthquake, no doubt, because you're also having to sacrifice a card from hand that has to specifically be one of these Lunar Phases. But I do just want to draw your attention to 3 Lunar Phase cards which actually have a benefit when they are discarded by a Lunar Phase. The Waning Crescent, when discarded, allows you to draw a card, then discard a card. That means we're having even more cycle in the deck and getting more Lunar Phases in our discard pile in theory, which might improve the Waxing Crescent down here, or could be really useful for the Volclipse as a finisher. When Final Quarter is discarded by a Lunar Phase, you can return a Lunar Spirit from your Underworld to your Spirit deck. This probably being the best discard option of the bunch, because again, you're just getting refunds on your Lunar Phases. And like I said, because we're going to have so many of these Lunar Phase cards in our list, it very much could be the case where we actually play 0 Ambrosia in the deck and just rely on Voldusk Heal as well as this Final Quarter to make the efficiency of our cards just much higher. And finally, Full Moon, when discarded, you may foretell the top 3 cards of your deck. Because we're drawing so many cards from Voldusk, it actually does seem very relevant to foretell the top 3, because we could get into a chain of using additional Lunar Phases and cashing in on the potential 2 per turn from a Voldusk while that's on the board. Going back to this Waning Crescent then, we have its primary effect, which is to return up to 2 Lunar Spirits from your Underworld to your Spirit deck. So this essentially is the Ambrosia that this Lunar Phase deck can play. Yes, it's 1 fewer Spirit that you're returning, but if you're using it with a Voldusk, it's essentially the same card. Or it can be a +1 Spirit, +1 card, which is also a pretty strong trade-off. Then there's Waning Gibbous, which shuffles a Lunar Phase, Volumbra, or Volclipse from your hand or Underworld into your deck in order to search your deck for a Voldusk and add it to your hand. Voldusk is by far the most important card in a Lunar Phase deck because that's what's going to get you drawing more cards. And again, because we're going to warp our deck substantially with a huge number of these Lunar Phase cards, it's really important to have this +3 Lunar Phase in our deck to actually help with the ratios, because it's very likely we're going to be quite low on actual Elestrals in the list. So utilizing this Gibbous to essentially give us 6 copies of Voldusk seems really important to me. I also like that this allows us to comfortably play just 1 Volumbra and 1 Volclipse in our deck, knowing that if somehow our opponent gets around it, we have a way to recur it in our list to try and load up the gun a second time in the game. Then there's the Final Quarter. This allows us to search the deck for up to 2 Lunar Phase and send them to your Underworld. This definitely feels like one of the weakest options, but in theory is turboing our Volclipse win condition. And at the same time, it's our best discard fodder, so it might get into the deck list just for that alone. Onto the counters then, we have Waxing Gibbous, which targets a Lunar Enchanter Lestral and changes its position. Then you may expend a Lunar and discard a Lunar Phase. If you do, the targeted Lestral cannot be destroyed by card effects once this turn. Of course, Voldusk is the linchpin of the deck, so having a card like this is actually really helpful to make sure that it's not going to be taken out of play, so that on the following turn we can continue to just cycle through the deck with our Lunar Phases. You're going to be casting your Voldusk in defense position almost the entire time, but this gives you some counterplay around Mudlet and Eddy, and those are relevant cards in the metagame right now, so I doubt this will be a 3-of in the deck, but could also be in the side in case you come into certain matchups. Then we have Full Moon. This allows us to enchant up to 2 Lunar Tilde on your field. This is pretty much going to be our means of turbo ascending into our Volclipse. I actually think this card alone means that we don't need to play Volumbra in our deck at all, and we just utilize this card to help go from Voldusk to Volclipse in 1 turn. Again, you probably don't need to play maximum counts of this card, because it's really just going to be there for when you're ready to go into Volclipse, but it's a solid discard option once again, so it's going to naturally inflate its counts to use with your other Lunar Phases. Next up we have First Quarter, which immediately allows us to draw a card. Then you may discard a Lunar Phase to return a Voldusk, Volumbra, or Volclipse from your Underworld to your hand. Once again, this is very much a protect the tower style option, so if we can't protect our Voldusk, we can at least get some recovery for it with the First Quarter. And once again, we're additionally drawing cards as we go, making sure that we have a constant flow of relevant phases in our hand, as well as some that can be used for discard fodder. And then we end on the Waxing Crescent, which is the only 2 spirit costing Lunar Phase. You target a Lunar Enchanter Lestral and give it +1 attack until the end phase for each Lunar Phase in all Underworlds. So in theory, this has a means of being an insane battle trick if you have multiple Lunar Phase in the discard pile. You can get this silly stat buff, and it's once again a means of protecting a Werepup or a Voldusk, but it is pricey, especially compared to something like Don't Poke the Bear. So again, not one of my favorites, a pretty expensive one, something that you play in the list just to give yourself the option to have the Volclipse combo turn. Now that we have a bit more context of those Lunar phase cards, let's get on to the other lines in the Ascension here. Volumbra is a 5/7 2 Lunar Spirit Elestral, and when you discard a Lunar phase during your main phase, you can special ascend your Voldusk into this Volumbra from your hand, and when you cast a Lunar phase Full Moon, you can special ascend this Volumbra to Volclipse from your deck. So Volumbra is a little bit annoying. You actually don't really want to special ascend into this card, because the draw on Voldusk is just way too important to make sure you're getting your full combo online. So I actually think this is somewhat of a downside to even having your list in the first place, but it can at least get you into Volclipse that little bit easier. The one thing I find a little bit strange is that you have to already cast Full Moon, and if you're casting Full Moon, you can just go straight from Voldusk to Volclipse anyway, via normal Ascension, so I don't see much point in this middle stage. And then we have Volclipse, which is a 6 attack, 12 defense, 3 Lunar Elestral. Volclipse does get +1 attack for each different title among Lunar phase in your underworld, 8 of course being the total, so this can be at its maximum power a 14/12. You can shuffle 8 Lunar phases with different titles from your underworld into your deck in order to return an opponent's field to their hand. Yes, the payoff is absolutely massive here, but it does still require a lot of setup, even when our deck is tailored to having very high counts of all of these Lunar phase cards, and leans heavily into the Voldusk. And unfortunately, this doesn't exactly read win the game. Sure, you free up this field so you can immediately get in with some big spirit damage with this Volclipse, and you don't have to be worried about your opponent's back row. The main issue is that the cards going back to your opponent's hand means they can insta-play a lot of these back down the following turn. So you do still have that headache of back row to worry about on the following turn. And additionally, after you've done this big shuffle effect, you could go down to like a 7 or 8 attacker, which is actually quite easy to reach if your opponent just is using Demeter or Zeus, alongside some high-statted 1 Spirit Elestrals. So you kind of also need to have back row protecting this Volclipse at the same time. And it basically has to be Waxing Crescent or Waxing Gibbous to have any impact here to protect your Volclipse. Overall, I'm absolutely fascinated by this type of archetype because it will feel so different and unique to every other deck in Elestrals, where you're just constantly trying to draw over and over again with Voldusk, trying to filter through multiple Lunar phases. And the payoff of this Volclipse does still feel quite appealing to me, but this deck is definitely going to take some time to be developed in the metagame whilst we figure out the correct counts of each of our Lunar phase cards, so that we're not being overly clunky. And we also need the right blend of other Elestrals going into the deck list, either to stall and give us more time in games to work towards this combination, or at least have some stronger combat Elestrals to try and clear the board constantly to find our spots to go in with our Voldusk and start drawing. Next up we have Werepup. This will definitely go in a Voldusk Lunar phase deck, because when you normal cast this Werepup, you can search your deck for a Lunar phase and add it to your hand. And when you cast Lunar phase Full Moon, you can special ascend this Werepup to Lyca Void from your hand or deck. No doubt this helps the consistency of a Lunar phase deck, and gives you a bit more license to play lower counts of the less impactful Lunar phase cards. And what's really cool about this is that you don't really care that this isn't exactly a big body, because there is the option to special ascend here, where you actually go immediately from Werepup, you grab a Full Moon from your deck, try and protect the Werepup for a turn, then use your counter rune to go straight into that Lyca Void. Lyca Void is a 2-spirit 6/2 that deals piercing damage and is unaffected by counter runes if you cast Lunar phase Full Moon this turn. Very cool effect, you know you're getting in with a bunch of damage, especially if you are Full Mooning to your Werepup before special ascending. So this Lyca Void is like guaranteed to deal a huge chunk of damage, almost like a finisher in a Lunar phase deck. In a Lunar phase list, you're almost certainly playing 3 Werepup, so I don't see a reason why you wouldn't just play 1 copy of Lyca Void in your list. Moving away from the Lunar phase stuff then, let's start looking at the other Lunar cards in the set. This is actually one of the faces of the starter deck in this expansion, and I always want to earmark these cards as great budget options for newer players, because the starter decks are just absolutely OP for their value for money. Starting off with Norby then, it's a 4/1, and when it receives 1 or more Lunar, you can give each Elestral that is not Lunar or Solar enchanted -2 attack until the end phase. When this Norby destroys an Elestral in battle, you can special ascend it to Doppelgator from your hand or deck. That means Norby definitely passes the big body checkpoint, where it can come onto the board effectively as a 6/1 beater, as long as your opponent isn't playing Solar or Lunar. And yes, you have to successfully destroy an Elestral in battle, but getting that ascension into Doppelgator is extremely powerful. I really rate Doppelgator. It's a 5/4 body, and Elestrals that are not Lunar or Solar enchanted get -1 attack, for each Lunar enchanting this Doppelgater. That's just a passive effect, that's just going on as long as Doppelgater's on your board. So effectively, Doppelgater is actually a 7/6 because of the stat reduction you're giving to your opponent. The only time where this feels a little bit worse is when your opponent is just setting high defense Elestrals, specifically things like Astrabbit with that 5 defense stat, because that's where Doppelgater is going to have trouble getting over it, unless you're playing those Temple of the Moon in your list. But there's definitely a world where I see Doppelgater just sitting on your board, never announcing attacks as to not pop back row, and then using your other Lunar Elestrals to push over your opponent's Ascensions, almost creating this like 5s board state where your middle statted Lunar Elestrals are always just going to outfight your opponents. Additionally, when this Doppelgater receives 1 or more Wind or Lunar in a Nexus, you can special ascend it to Fulgorix from your hand or deck. Fulgorix is a 10/6 2 Lunar 1 Wind Elestral, and Elestrals that are not enchanted with Lunar or Solar get -5 attack. So again, you're effectively a 15/11, and unlike Doppelgater, you will be still bursting through many defense position Elestrals. But similarly to Doppelgater, you can just sit on Fulgorix and allow that stat reduction to completely cripple your opponent. You can Nexus 1 Lunar or 1 Wind, and when it receives 1 or more Lunar or Wind in a Nexus, you can target opponent's cards and put it to the bottom of their deck. I do think it's nice that you can clear your path of annoying back row options from the opponent via this Nexus option, by putting them to the bottom of your opponent's deck, and sort of clearing that runway for Fulgorix to get in with value rather than just sitting in play. But because this is a 3-cost Elestral that doesn't have much protection for itself inherently, I still feel like Norby is the star of the show here, with Doppelgater being a great special Ascension option in the deck, and I think it's rare that we actually put Fulgorix into the list. Next up we have the other starter deck Ascension line, starting off with Fawnlet, which is a 3/2, and when normal cast, you can search your deck for an Artemis or Theraheart and add it to your hand. And this Fawnlet gets +1 defense for each Lunar enchanting each Artemis on the field. So this doesn't have the biggest body, but I suppose if you're going to instantly search Artemis and immediately put that into play and invest a huge number of spirits, you can make yourself a tankier defense position Elestral. It's obviously vulnerable to rune removal, but it's definitely a way that you can make your Fawnlet more of a tower, with the idea being is that you can ascend off this Fawnlet. I think even without instantly enchanting your Artemis, which you probably don't want to do too often, I think this card is just good enough for being a searcher for Artemis, where I can foresee the Lunar decks foregoing Elechic and just going for Fawnlets, so you can get that Artemis exactly into hand. Next up there is that Theraheart, which we can search with Fawnlet. It's a 6/4, and when a player activates a counter rune, you can disenchant 2 Lunar from your Artemis in order to negate that rune. Then you may special ascend this Theraheart to Posthumous from your hand or deck. Bear in mind, this says when any player activates a counter rune, so you can be the one proccing this. It's only natural that your opponent won't be activating counter runes if they see a Theraheart in play. And it's a little bit scuffed, honestly, that you're negating your own rune activation, but I suppose it is just another way that you can get into your Posthumous, so it is something to bear in mind. Generally, I think this Theraheart is really underwhelming, whereas Posthumous is a 13/11 3-spirit costing Elestral. When your Artemis suppresses a card, you can target and destroy that card, and while Artemis is enchanted, this Posthumous is unaffected by counter runes. I always think it's really important to have protection on these 3-spirit Elestrals, and protection from counter runes is probably the most important of the bunch. So as soon as you get into your Posthumous, you can start aggressively swinging and making these 3 spirits count. And Artemis is one of the more searchable divine runes just because of Fawnlet anyway. So you can see what they're going with here. It really reminds me of Chronodile, but this time in Lunar. And actually, I don't hate that as an idea. Chronodile probably being the easier to get out into play because you naturally have Nexus options from Poseidon. But we do have Lunar Phase Full Moon that can definitely help out this deck, get themselves into a 3-spirit Elestral. And there are some other decent 2-spirit Elestrals that we're going to look at today, which could help you get into that Posthumous. Overall, definitely think Fawnlet will see a lot of play, and Posthumous does have some upside that I can see some players building around. Next up, there's that reprint of Gloombats. Not too much to say here. We know it could be a decent special cast option, but now there is a Ascension for Gloombat, which is Phasmacore. This is an 8/1 body for 2 Lunar Spirits, and when this Phasmacore is destroyed in battle or by an opponent's card effect, you can expend 1 Lunar, and if you do, during this turn's end phase, you can special cast it from your Underworld. So once you do establish this Phasmacore, it's a difficult unit to get rid of, and you may think this is a decent option to work towards your Farrageist or Posthumous, but now that we have Lunar Phase Full Moon, I really don't think this card serves much of a purpose. Yes, it does have that huge 8 attack, but this is a horrific card to get shielded. If your opponent simply is running Cryoblast in their main deck, it might be a card that you may not even want to put back into play, because it's so expensive that you're having to spend another 3 spirits just getting this card back. And it also walks straight into Tsunami, Eddy, Mudlet, those sorts of cards. So I think overall this one's a little bit weak. I would just look towards having New Moon in my list if I'm trying to turbo out a 3-spirit Lunar card. Next up there's Hypnosm. This is just a 1/1, and when this is destroyed, you can special cast it from your underworld in attack position, Misenchanted. I don't really get the idea here at all, to be honest with you. Are you trying to get a Misenchanted card so you can then ascend the following turn? I'm a real hater of this. I think it's far worse than something like Foamy that we could already play in water. Next up we have Ectopossum. It's a 2 Lunar Spirit Elestral that's a 3/3 body, and when this Ectopossum is sent from your hand or deck to your underworld, you can expend 1 Lunar in order to special cast it from your underworld with 2 Lunar Spirits. Now, we do have a number of ways that we can discard this from hand. We have Comagma, we have Golden Apple, and there's also a few ways we can send this from our deck to the underworld via mostly the frost stuff, the Moroliths, the Snowlets, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, I think Ectopossum just being a 3/3 means that there's really not much reason to actually want to special cast this guy out. Again, it's going to be a way to get like a cheeky Ascension off, but the only rune you can do this with is Golden Apple of Discord, so you have to have a really specific hand where you've accumulated Ectopossum, Apple, and the 3-drop you're trying to ascend into. So again, I'm seeing this as much more of a gimmicky card than a strong one. Next up we have some of my favourite cards of the set, the Toxiri and Night Venom. Toxiri is a 2/4 Lunar Spirit Elestral, and when you cast this, you can search your deck for a Dense Fog and add it to your hand. Toxiri also has the text that suppressed Elestrals get -2 attack and -2 defense. This turns your Artemis into like a budget Zeus, which I think is pretty cool, and definitely fits the theme of like a suppression-based Lunar deck. Dense Fog's already like a playable card, but I actually think it's Night Venom the Ascension here, which makes it feel very powerful. Night Venom's a 6/6, and you can discard a Dense Fog in order to target and destroy up to 2 cards. And while you have at least 2 Dense Fog in your underworld, this Night Venom cannot be targeted by opponent's Invoke runes. Invoke protection is fine. It's just a better way of making this card sticky, but I really like the idea of having a 2-card destruction option on a 2-Spirit Elestral. Kind of reminds me of a Lunar version of Lustragon in many ways. Yeah, I love the idea that this can pop some back row to get your attack in for the turn, and then ideally your opponent can't even use an Invoke rune to respond on this card. I definitely want to be building around a Dense Fog list with these Scorpions. I think they're very powerful. Next up we have Havocub, which is a 4/3, and its position can't be changed by opponent's card effects. This card is just permanently worse than a Misenchanted Aeromare, which is seeing absolutely no play. Honestly, I see no redeeming qualities about this card. Then there's Pulveror. This is a 2 spirits 7/4. This Pulveror in your hand can special ascend from your Lunar Elestral if you also disenchant a Lunar from your field. There are some immediate synergies that you can see here. Formula isn't really the biggest body in the world, but immediately grabs you Artemis. So if you search Artemis, cast Artemis, then you can immediately go from Faunlet to Pulveror, and suddenly you're threatening a 7 attacker. There's also the fun synergy with Cryptoris, which we'll look at in a bit more detail later, but Cryptoris can help find your Pulveror in the first instance, giving you even more ways to get this into hand to immediately ascend into. The 7/4 body doesn't blow me away, but it does make some of these searching, lower statted Elestrals much more appealing, where you get their strong effect, their activation, and then transform yourself into a beta. We do get reprints of Drakid and Draking in this expansion, so if you haven't yet picked these up, now you have a chance. I don't think the archetype will change too much from how we already know it, but I did just want to mention that Schnark is a really good water Elestral that gives us a good searching option for Rock in a Hard Place, which does add to the consistency of going Drakid plus Rock to get into your Draking that little bit more smoothly. Moving on to Corvuscull, this is a 1 spirit 2/4, and when this receives 1 or more Lunar, you can foretell 3 and exchange a Foretold card with a card in your Underworld. The new card then becomes Foretold. So typically you're going to put the card from your Underworld to your next top deck. This is like a really slow and worse statted Ash Rabbit, which is already just a card that you can only really justify in like maximum 2 count in your deck, because it takes a while for this card to be powerful. I really don't see much reason why we'd ever want to have Corvuscull unless we were trying some weird Cryptoris deck where we just want to have a critical mass of cards that say Foretell on them to buff the stat line of this Cryptoris to turn it into more of a beta. But overall, I think this card is pretty bad. We may as well jump to Cryptoris. It's a 2/4 body that gets +2 attack for each time you foretold this turn, and then you can expend 1 Lunar in order to foretell 3 and add any number of Lunar Elestrals that cost at least 2 spirits foretold in this way to your hand. So I do think this Cryptoris is a strange card in that you really don't want to play too many 2-spirit Elestrals or more, because it does dilute your deck significantly. The one thing I'll note is that Pulveror is a really good 2-spirit because it can special ascend easily, and Necrolith is also quite a powerful one. So there are decent targets for this foretelling, but I still can't really see myself playing more than like a combination of 5 of these in the deck. So there's no guarantee that you're actually getting a card back from this Cryptoris, and you are already having to expend 1. So that's actually quite an expensive card. The good news is, even if you're not getting a card for free from this foretell, you are still stacking your top deck quite nicely, and you turn Cryptoris into an immediate 4/4, so it at least becomes like a reasonably sized body, and actually can become a beta if we have other foretelling cards in our deck. Maybe we could play a combination of Lunar and Solar here, using Apollo to actually push Cryptoris into a higher attack statted Elestral, whilst filtering the deck of Solar cards, and also scouting just in case there are some 2-cost Lunars there. Overall, it feels like there's not much payoff here. This is a really interesting card, but an expensive one at that. Next up we have Bandaloon. This is a 3/1, and you can expend 2 Lunar in order to take control of an opponent's face down rune. I think the stat line of Bandaloon is what really lets it down. Your opponent can of course just chain their counter rune that you're trying to target here. So I think that expend is just way too expensive overall. The only real nod I give this card is that you can have this strange combination of like running Gloombats in the main and then having Bandaloons in the side. Punish your opponent game 1 by casting out a Gloombat, and then in game 2 switch to Bandaloons, and then just punish them for having only 1 set down. That's the only fun gimmick I can see going on here, but ultimately I don't think it's that competitive. Then we have Porcurafe. It's a 2/2 that when it enters battle, you can give an Elestral -2 for each enchanting Lunar on this card. So you can sort of brute force this into a big beta, but I really don't think it's going to be all that powerful either. The stat line just still isn't that impressive, and you have to invest many Lunar Spirits to make it worthwhile. Then there's Chromalis, which is a 4/2, and you can Nexus up to 2 Lunar. When you do, search your deck for a Spectral Elestral and add it to your hand. That means that Chromalis can search itself, but also could search something like Specteris, which is another decent 1-drop. And I suppose if we are trying to add consistency to a list that's trying to turbo out Farrageist or Posthumous, possibly alongside Lunar Phase New Moon, this Chromalis can be a great way to just get that 1-of into our hand, so that we don't have to actually play 3 copies of Farrageist or Posthumous. We just go all in on finding one of them from this Chromalis. There actually aren't that many amazing receive cards in Lunar. I think Norby might be the best one, so that might be what's really lacking from this Chromalis. But I do like that you can sort of shimmy around your deck building by having Chromalis Artemis rather than having really high counts of your 3-drop, and still adding consistency to that approach. The Lunar Lith is Necrolith. It's a 7/3, and it can be normal cast if an opponent has at least 2 suppressed cards. When you cast this Necrolith, you can destroy a suppressed Elestral. So naturally this is going to combine with, I think, Dense Fog as the big card here. So I can foresee Necrolith going in like a Toxiri style deck. Because I think the big issue of this Necrolith is that you don't really want to play many copies of this card, because you're limited to how many Dense Fog you can activate. But being able to come onto the board with a nice 7/3 stat line and immediately popping an Elestral is a powerful option that I do think will be worthwhile in the Toxiri Dense Fog deck. Moving on to Earth then, we have the Antitan Ascension line, starting off with Ardbud, which is a 2/1 Earth Elestral. I'm actually going to read this card out of order. When this Ardbud receives 1 or more Earth Spirit, you can search your deck for a 1-spirit Insectoid Elestral and add it to your hand. So at the very least, this card is replacing itself with an Insectoid. We know that Viscerus is one of the best Earth Insectoid options we have. There's also Specteris, which is kind of cool as well, that you can search for this card. So at the very least, this is a cast that can get you into other powerful 1-drops. You can disenchant 1 spirit from your Insectoid cards in order to special ascend this Ardbud to Ardvarum from your deck. It's actually a bit annoying that this for some reason can't special ascend from hand, so if you do just draw Ardvarum, too bad. But it's hard to actually get this special ascension off, because you either have to have an Insectoid initially that stayed on the board, or used Ardbud to search an Insectoid, protect your Ardbud for a turn, then get your Insectoid down, and immediately you sort of lose your normal cast just to get into your Ardvarum. But nonetheless, this is a 6/3, and when you cast this, you can search your deck for an Insectoid card and add it to your hand. So you're doing a strange cycle here where the Ardbud initially gets an Insectoid, then you're spending an Insectoid, then Ardvarum immediately gets you back another one. So you are constantly filtering through your deck of Insectoid cards. Ardvarum can target and destroy an Insectoid Elestral, and if you do, you can special ascend this Ardvarum to Antitan from your hand or deck. Again, it's a weird one. Like, ideally, you've used like Viscerus and got your board full of these Insectoids, so you can be popping off of Ardbuds and Ardvarums to get you straight into Antitan. But honestly, I don't think that's the easiest thing to pull off. What I do think is very cool about Ardvarum, and where it might see some play, is as a sideboard option, because that targeted destruction can be on your opponent's Insectoid Elestrals, and we know that Viscerus and Specteris are very powerful cards that often see a lot of play, so there is a world where you play this card just as a counter strategy to the opponent in the side. Antitan is a 11/8, and you can discard an Insectoid from your hand in order to target and destroy a card. This effect can be activated up to 2 times a turn, and while there is an Insectoid Elestral on your field, this Antitan is unaffected by opponent's Elestral effects. It's nice to have some security around the likes of Boombat at the very least, and this turns all those Insectoids that you're drawing into much more dangerous cards. I think we could definitely explore with a Viscerus Specterus like Earth style deck here, trying to incorporate the Antitan, but ultimately I think it's a little bit slow and gimmicky to actually be a top tier threat. Also in Earth, there's a reprint of Clovey looking pretty sad in the snow, but it does have a new Ascension form, which is the Cedasaur. It's a 4/6 body for 1 Earth, 1 Frost Spirit, and when this is sent from your deck to the Underworld, you can special cast it with either 2 Frost Spirits or 2 Earth Spirits. Immediately that makes me think about a Morolith and the new Snowlet deck, where we have a means of cheating a 4/6 body straight onto the board. There's also the second bit of text here where you can expend an Earth in order to search your deck for a 3-cost Frost or Earth Elestral and add it to your hand, bearing in mind that this card will be misenchanted when you special cast it, so it feels like that text is a little bit less relevant, but it could be a way for you to like backdoor into your 3-drop if you are trying to build around Blistrix. Because of Snowlet and Morolith, I think this is always going to be a Frost card, really. I'm not super impressed by the 4/6 body, but it does allow sort of a gacha element to the Frost deck. It's actually really powerful alongside Morolith, which can sort of beat through the first thing, and then the Cedasaur gets in for a bunch of spirit damage. Next up, there's Cactobrol, which is a 1/2. When an opponent activates a counter rune, you can disenchant an Earth from this Cactobrol in order to negate that rune, and when a player casts Sandstorm, you can special ascend this Cactobrol to Cactobrum from your hand or deck. It's kind of funny that you're sort of locking your opponent out of counter runes, but spending your normal cast to do this doesn't seem that powerful, especially because you have to disenchant from this anyway. Yeah, really expensive and pretty bad cost. Let's remind you what Sandstorm does. It costs 1 wind, 1 earth. For each Elestral that's not Earth Enchanted, return it to its owner's hand if it's in defense position. Otherwise, change it to defense position, and until the end phase, those Elestrals cannot change position. So again, like a weird, specific, and expensive rune to try and cast, just to try and get into this Cactobrum, which is a 4/6 and can't be targeted by invoke runes. When this receives 1 or more Earth, you can special cast a Cactobrum from your Underworld. So yeah, there's this weird like counter rune lock thing you're trying to do here, but the bodies themselves just aren't that powerful, and Sandstorm is just another bad card you're putting into your deck. Earth gets a new invoke rune called No Stone Unturned. For 2 Earth, you can search your deck for a Golem Elestral and add it to your hand. Although there are some other like 1 spirit golems in the game, I really don't think you're ever going to want to pay 3 spirits just to get into them. So I really think we're looking at the lifts here as the big payoff for this card. Paying those 2 Earth Spirits does allow you to actually normal cast Verdalith with a bit more consistency, because you have to be behind on at least 4 spirits. And it actually allows you to cast Verdalith essentially for free, because you're spending the 2 for the No Stone, then you're playing the Verdalith, and then you're getting 4 back. So there is somewhat of a cool loop there in Earth, just making Verdalith more live. But then I suppose it gives you license to play at least like 1 of Lavalith in the deck, which as we know is still a really powerful card. Maybe a little bit lesser if you're paying 4 spirits for it, of course, but it can still be a big swing in games. And obviously Arcolith is like a really played card right now as well, but I really don't think we need to be playing No Stone to make that work. It's really just a Verdalith card that makes me interested in this effect. But Verdalith's stat line is still pretty cringe, so I'm really still not that invested. Getting on to the fire stuff then, Cinder gets a reprint because it has a new Ascension in Salashade, which is a 3/3 for 1 Lunar, 1 Fire. It gets +1 attack for each Elestral in your opponent's Underworld, and when a player casts an Elestral, an opponent must send the top 3 cards of their deck to their Underworld. There probably is going to be a critical mass for mill, but I don't think we're there yet. And because the bodies of most of these mill cards are really unimpressive, I never think we even have the opportunity to ascend into this Salashade in the first place, so I'm not all that impressed by this approach. Next up there's Bellaby, which is a 2/2. Wind and Fire enchanted Elestrals get +1 attack, and you can target a Fire or Wind Elestral, and give it the effect, this Elestral is unaffected by counter runes until next turn. I don't actually hate this card. The likes of Toxiswarm and Necroth do have synergy, in that you can create this like little expend package in a deck with Wind and Fire, and Bellaby, similarly to just having a Stadium in play, allows you to walk over much more stuff. That being said, it's definitely a win more card, right? You already need to have stuff in play for it to feel impactful. The Ascension is Enfornax, which is a 4/7. You can expend a Wind in order to return an opponent's card to their hand, and when you cast an Elestral or rune with at least Fire or Wind, you can give this Enfornax +2 attack until the end phase. This card has an atrocious stat line, and it gets a little bit better if you're casting Elestrals or runes, but when this card initially comes onto play, it feels atrocious. Returning cards to the hand is just not as great as Destruction either, because then they have the opportunity to just play it on the following turn, so yeah, I really think that's a pretty poor Ascension. Torchin is a really fun 1/1 Fire Elestral. When this declares an attack, you can return Fire Spirits from your Underworld to your Spirit deck, up to the number of enchanting Fire on your field. So Fire finally has a healer. Unfortunately, it's this card, because having to declare an attack is pretty atrocious. And you also need to have just a number of spirits on your field. So yeah, I really think Torchin is pretty bad right now. Honestly, I think a Fire Nexus could just use the new Divine Healing instead of this card. Moving on to Water, we have Schnark and Jorblin. Schnark is a 3/3, and when you cast this, you can search your deck for a card with enchantment cost of Lunar Water and add it to your hand. This can get a couple of great runes actually, Rock in a Hard Place and the new Tsunami High Tide, and it can also get Jorblin to hand, adding consistency consistency to your Ascension line. Schnark doesn't exactly pass the big body test, but I think this is still a good enough searcher that we'll actually look to play this card if we're trying to run a Draking deck, a Kurobis deck, or just to give consistency to Jorblin, which is a very powerful Ascension. Jorblin is an 8/4 for 1 water, 1 lunar, and can expend 1 water in order to change the position of an Elestral that is not water enchanted, and when 1 or more Elestrals change their positions, you can draw a card. So immediately you can expend to draw when you do get this Ascension into Jorblin, which I think is a really powerful payoff. This card is just oozing with synergy already in water, with Tsunami High Tide, with Eddy, with Alter. There's so many things that can activate this Jorblin, which may end up in you getting a huge number of cards. Combine that with the fact that this is a really good aggressive stat line that can't walk into Tsunami itself, means that I actually think this is in a really good place. Even if we only see this line as like a 2/1 in a Draking deck, I'm still really impressed by this combination of cards. And I also think it makes a Kurobis deck much stronger as well. We do get a reprint for Oysteress, which is a 1/3 that gets +1 defense for each water enchanting it. This is an absolutely terrible card. And there's Oystillery, which is the new Ascension here. It's a 4/8. This Oystillery in your hand can special ascend from Oysteress if you also disenchant 1 water from your field. So at least Oysteress now has a reason to be played because you can cheat into this, and you can disenchant 1 water in order to target and destroy a card. 4/8's a pretty bad stat line, but at least you can Nexus from Poseidon onto this to immediately get some destruction. It's kind of one of these slow cards that you want to sit on and just blast away with this alongside your Poseidon. And the good news is we can just forego Oysteress altogether and just attempt to normal ascend this card in a water deck. But ultimately I think we have better Ascensions right now in water. Next up we have Starbit and its Supernova form. Starbit is just a 1/1, but it gets +2 attack for each water enchanting it, and you can Nexus up to 2 water. When this Starbit has 7 or more attack during your main phase, you must either destroy it or special ascend it to Starbit Supernova from your hand or deck. So Starbit has the obvious energy with Poseidon here. You just Poseidon, then you Nexus the 2 onto your Starbit. And with 3 water spirits, you go up to that 7 attack so that we can get the special Ascension off. This Starbit is a 7/2 and cannot be normal cast. When you special cast this Starbit via another Starbit's effect, it gains the effect if this Starbit would be destroyed, you may first Nexus all spirits from it. If you do, draw a card, then it is destroyed. This is a really cool effect actually. You're returning your spirits back to your board, getting the sort of refund that you had to spend getting this card initially into play. And you also get that cheeky card draw out of it as well. I think maybe this is a mini package that goes in an already Water Nexus style approach, but I also think there are some cool possibilities. Just the fact that this is a 1-cost Water Elestral with that 7 in the attack stat. It has some cool synergy with Foamy, even though you have to put this in defense position to begin with. And we have been lacking good options with Rise from the Depths, and this is certainly a good one. Constantly trying to recur a 7 attack minion isn't the worst thing in the world, so I think there could be something to this Starbit Supernova. I'm actually going to explore it quite a lot. For Thunder, we have Electrify and Electronite. Electrify is a 1/1, and you can disenchant 1 Thunder from this in order to search your deck for a 1-spirit Thunder Elestral and add it to your hand. This just definitely isn't worth your normal cast. It's a really bad effect. And Thunder has such a gluttony of good Elestrals on cast that you probably never want to play this card unless you're trying to work in the Electronite, which is a 4/6 body, and you can Nexus 1 Thunder or 1 Lunar. When this Electronite receives 1 or more Thunder, you can special cast an Electrify from your hand or deck. When you activate your Electrify's effect, you can draw a card. So that's the only thing that Electrify really has going for it, where now that it's a special cast, you're using it just to keep tutoring, whilst also getting additional card draw. So there could be a world where you play a mini package, where you try and ascend into Electronite and just hope you haven't drawn into your flies. But ultimately, we know the Thunder is already like such a good, tight deck list, I don't think you ever actually make the space for this combination of cards. There is some other promising stuff for Thunder though. We do have Titanostrike, which is a 2/4, and when a player casts Thunderstorm, you can expend 1 Thunder in order to target and destroy an Elestral. Thunderstorm's a pretty solid card, but adding on this Titanostrike can make turns devastating. But my main issue with Titanostrike is that you never really want to play 3 copies of Thunderstorm and this card, because it doesn't pass the big body test, so I don't expect to see a huge amount of play. Magnaros is a really interesting card though, simply because it's a Thunder Elestral that has the text, you can Nexus up to 2 Thunder. As we know, there are some incredibly strong Receive Elestrals in Thunder. This is obviously busted with Rabbits, and it can be great with Boombat as well, which is terrifying. When you do Nexus, you can foretell cards equal to the number of Thunder enchanted cards on your field, and add up to 1 Thunder Invoke rune foretold this way to your hand. It's pretty low odds that you're going to find anything, but every now and then you can hit Race to the Top, and that makes Magnaros absolutely incredible. Honestly, just because this card says Nexus means it could find a way into Thunder, because the receives are just so OP right now, so I would keep an eye on this card for sure. Thunder also gains a counter rune, Magnetic Force Field. This can only be cast when an opponent activates a non-counter effect that causes you to expend spirits. Negate that effect, and the opponent must expend 2 spirits. This probably never makes the main deck, but could be a side deck option if you're facing like a Scorpion approach, or you know you're coming up against an Eruption build. Even in that scenario, healers may just be like the more versatile side deck cards, so I'm not that impressed by this effect. Onto Wind, we have Wind Djinn, which is a 3/1, and when it receives one or more wind, you can name a card, then foretell 3. If one or more cards with that name are foretold, you may add one of them to your hand and special ascend this Wind Djinn to Tornadjinn from your hand or deck. Tornadjinn is an 8/2 wind and solar Elestral that says you can expend wind or solar in order to search your deck for 3 cards with different names. If you do, add 1 at random to your hand and shuffle the rest into your deck. This is a really interesting package of cards that I do think makes like a foretell solar deck much stronger. Obviously the upside of playing this within solar is that you can already scout your top decks with your Apollo, or use First Light to guarantee a card on top of your deck to then use your Wind Djinn to brute force out into that Tornadjinn, which has the very impressive 8/2 stat line. That stat line is something that's really lacking in like a Cow's solar foretell deck. So having this aggressive body is something that I'm really interested in, whilst at the same time allowing you to just get one of the 3 best cards in your deck into your hand immediately is a very powerful play. There are also worlds where you just try and brute force this into a deck that already plays a bunch of the same named card, for example Morfrost or Lunar Phase, where you just have such good odds of hitting from your foretell 3, so that Wind Djinn is immediately at least a draw 1 and then can brute force its way into a big body. This Ascension line is really cool. I definitely want to work on a new foretell list with this incorporated. We do get a reprint of Carry On, as well as an Ascension in Carry Off. I think both these cards are bad. The new Carry Off is a 5/3. When your Carry On is destroyed in battle, you can special cast this Carry Off from your hand. You can expend 2 Lunar in order to target an opponent's Elestral and take control of it until the end phase. Like, sure, you can take your opponent's stuff and get in for a bunch of spirit damage, but the body on this Carry Off just really isn't big enough, even though you're getting to special cast it. I'm really not impressed by this approach, although it does have one of my favourite arts in the set. The final wind card is Aviolith. It's a 4/6 and can be normal cast for 2 wind if an opponent has at least 2 face down runes. When you cast this Aviolith, you can draw a card for each face down rune on an opponent's field. I don't feel like consistency or card draw was much of an issue with wind whenever I've played it, so I don't think we necessarily need an effect like this. But again, it could be a sideboard option, especially with the new Lunar Phase deck potentially being powerful. And to some respect, it is like Nog on legs, so it's not that bad. Its stat line isn't that appealing though, to be honest with you, even though it is drawing cards. You probably have to play Island of Aeolia to make this card work, and that's not very common. Similar to the Gloombat Bandaloon thing I was mentioning earlier, you could try and do an Aviolith in main and then have Tornadoes in the side and do a switcheroo after game 1, but even then I don't think that that's all that strong, to be honest. We do get a new Morfrost form in Scorpio. This is just a 2/2, but when you cast this Morfrost, you can discard a Morfrost in order to target an opponent's Elestral and set its base defense to 0 until the end phase. And then during this turn's end phase, you can expend 2 Frost in order to destroy that Elestral. So this is like a PTA on legs, but does offer some great counterplay to the likes of Astrabbit, which is, as we know, one of the most popular Elestrals in the game. And let's not forget there are potential upsides to discarding a Morfrost, because we do have the Bat form here, which when discarded you can special cast a Morfrost that is not Bat from your Underworld. I think the most common line of play is that you're going to use Lycan form to find Scorpio and Bat, then next turn cast your Scorpio, discard the Bat, get your Lycan back into play. So this does allow you a bit of a swarm approach with the Morfrost deck, and I do think this is a decent way to start fueling your Abominable form. I also think it's worth noting that we now just have more Morfrost to play with, and again we could hit this critical mass where we just have the new Snowlet, enough Morfrost available, and Morolith, so we can just discard a bunch of these Morfrost as quickly as possible, turning our Abominable form into a much better beat stick. Maybe at that point we even look towards things like Pulsar as well. Speaking of which, we do have Snowlet and its Ascensions. I think this is my favourite card from the set. I really like it. It's a 4/2 that when it receives 1 or more Frost, you can send the top 3 cards from your deck to your Underworld. Really simple, really powerful, but I do really like using the discard pile in Frost as that like extension to your hand, because it finally makes Kione a much more usable card. We've already seen Sadasaur, there's already Abominable Form and Pulsar. There are big upsides to putting lots of cards in your discard pile in Frost, and this is a big upgrade to the previous Morfrost package within a Morolith deck, because now we get to play a nice 4/2 body in a Frost deck. So yeah, I'm really high on Snowlet alone. Now let's start looking at its Ascensions. Asprawl is a 7/4, and when it's sent from your deck to the Underworld, you can special ascend your Snowlet to it. You can expend 1 Frost in order to send the top 4 cards from your deck to your Underworld. It's a bit of a weird one. Yes, there's that high roll of Snowlet hitting Asprawl, and then suddenly again you're into a big beater, but I really think expending that 1 Frost to discard a further 4 really isn't that big of an upside, because it's really unlikely that you hit Blisterix from that. So most of the time you're just like paying for no reason. Blisterix is a 12/6 for 2 Frost, 1 Wind, and when it's sent from your deck to the Underworld, you can special ascend your Asprawl to it. You can return 3 Elestrals from your underworld to the bottom of your deck in order to destroy a card. This is pretty solid, to be honest with you. I don't think we care too much about Asprowl. I think that's too gacha, too high roll. But if we are just going to play Snowlet and Morolith and Sadosaur, even just bringing Blisterix into play, returning some Elestrals back to the deck in order to destroy a card could be a big payoff. The one issue being is that we don't really have any inherent protection for Blisterix, so I could very much see a world where we just go Snowlet Morolith and use them as our beaters, and have Kyoto to keep recovering these cards. So overall, I love the Snowlet, but I don't care too much about its Ascensions. Frost gets a new counter rune, the Aurora Borealis. You discard a card in order to enchant up to 1 Frost from your underworld to your field, and return up to 1 Frost from your underworld to your spirit deck. So this is a pretty low impact counter rune, to be honest with you. Maybe there are some combat tricks you can do with Mountains of Boreas, and maybe there are some synergies with the likes of Morfrost once again, where you're trying to discard specific cards, but this one's still a hard sell for me. Onto Solar, we have the Kokore Ascension line. Kokore is a 4/1 and cannot be suppressed. When you activate First Light, you can special ascend this Kokore to Draco Ray from your hand or deck. Draco Ray being a 7/3 for 1 solar, 1 fire. When you cast this Draco Ray, you can return up to 3 solar spirits from your underworld to your spirit deck. This is a huge amount of healing actually, and immediately sort of helps pay for that First Light that you've used, possibly even Apollo that you've used. It's a great way to recover a huge amount of spirits in Solar. Solar already has like a bunch of ways you can have some good healing, which is by no means a bad thing, especially because this is a much bigger body than trying to use like Nexus to Trora stuff. Now we can have a Foretell approach that also is chock full of healing. I think with this and Soul Stocks you have a bunch of spirit recursion, which is actually pretty cool. Draco Ray also has the text, during your draw phase you can expend a fire in order to special ascend this Draco Ray to Dragalis from your deck. Dragalis is a 13/5 for 2 solar, 1 fire, and you can expend a fire in order to suppress each face-up card on your opponent's field until the end phase. Then enchant Solar from your spirit deck and or underworld to this Dragalis up to the number of cards suppressed this way. So I guess the idea is that you can pump this up similar to like an Arcalyph where you can enchant all to yourself and then get a huge amount of damage in. Ultimately, I'm not that impressed by Dragalis. I think if ever we're ascending, it's always going to be into Lustragon in Solar, unless we're doing some of these special ascensions. That being said, I really like Kokore Draco Ray going into a Foretell deck. I actually think we have a bunch of cool synergies going on in that list now. With this line, with Winjin, I think Foretell Solar got a lot better this set. Solar also gets Armadon. This is a 1/6, and when it changes position, an opponent must expend 1 spirit. I actually think this card is kind of crazy. Solar really lacks those massive bodies, and having a 6 stat in defense is huge. Unless the opponent is using the likes of Zeus or Demeter, they probably are going to have to change the position of this card. So immediately, like, it gets value by forcing the opponent to expend. What I really like about this is that we're trying to get into Lustragon in a lot of our Solar builds, and just having a big body like this that your opponent is disincentivized to deal with gives us that bit of wiggle room, that bit of time to get into our Lustragon and just completely run away with games. I feel like Solar Nexus already was an archetype that had a number of big bodies within it, and actually some of the best performing Solar Nexus builds already used Galaxy, so we can actually misenchant Armadon, and it gives Solar its own version of Moss Station. Really, really cool card. I think this one's absolutely busted. Its Ascension Gardon kind of sucks though. It's a 3/8. Your Elestrals get +2 defense, and when an opponent activates an effect that targets 1 or more of your runes, you can expend 2 Solar in order to negate that effect. Like, sure, protecting Apollo is pretty important, but I feel like that expend is pretty awful. And again, if we're hard ascending into anything, I want it to be Lustragon. Next up for Solar, there's Luxomare, which is a 4/5, and when an opponent takes control of this, you can special cast an Aosdale from your hand or deck. Aosdale being a 6/6, and when you cast this Aosdale, you can foretell 3. You can special cast a 1 spirit Solar Elestral foretold this way. The way that we give our opponent a Luxomare is the Cunning Offer invoke rune. Until the end phase, an opponent takes control of a target Elestral on your field, and that Elestral gains the effect when this is destroyed in battle, you must expend 3 spirits. I think we can all see this is pretty terrible. It's a combo-based strategy. Like, sure, you get a free body back for the Luxomare that you normal cast most of the time from your Foretell, and Aosdale is like a reasonable body, but it's really not worth all the hassle of spirits we're investing, and it's not like we're building this big board either. Solar gained an interesting new counter rune, the Helios Slumber, which targets an Elestral in your underworld and puts it on top of your deck. The fact this is a counter rune is kind of the weirdest thing. Like, you can see what your opponent's done on their turn, then be like, aha, I have the right Elestral in my underworld to respond to this. But ultimately, I feel like this is just way worse than First Light, simply because it's a slower card to activate. On to the last couple of runes then, we have Tsunami High Tide, which is a water and lunar invoke rune. You change the positions of up to 2 Elestrals, and you may enchant a water or lunar from your underworld to your field. This is another searchable option from Schnark, and honestly doesn't feel that much more expensive than a normal Tsunami, because you're getting that sort of re-enchant option from your underworld. So yes, you are putting up that additional spirit, but you're also able to re-enchant to your field. There aren't many great receivers in Lunar, but we know there are some interesting ones in water, Dratagua being kind of one of the better ones. But also just getting more opportunities to ascend into Jorblin is pretty interesting for a deck like this. And this could actually be another way that you can try and cheat out into one of your 3-drop Lunar Elestrals, where you change some battle positions, re-enchant to your Lunar guy, then on the following turn get your normal Ascension in. So yeah, a lot of good applications for this card. I'm actually really impressed by it. I think it will see a lot of play. Obviously a lot less than the regular Tsunami, but I think a lot of Lunar lists specifically will really enjoy this. Then finally we have Hurricane. This one's really divided opinion amongst the player base, even though it's such a simple card. For 1 wind, 1 thunder, 1 water, you destroy all face down runes. I actually think this card sucks. It's really risky to say that because this obviously has a potentially very powerful effect, but I think there are large portions of the game where this doesn't feel that good to play, and it's always going to be very, very spirit expensive. If you're trying to do a combo strategy, we already have Chariot Ride, and Thunderstorm even costs 1 less and can also target face-ups, with Divine Runes being some of the most powerful cards in the game right now. So low-key, I think Hurricane is just going to be a boogeyman that you don't actually have to come up against too often. I don't know, I could be way off on this one. I've heard a lot of very, very good players saying this is absolutely busted, but I don't really see myself paying 3 spirits just to clear the board of my opponent's face downs. It feels like you're burning yourself for so much just to try and create that board control. Let me know what you think on this one. Like, maybe I'm just missing the mark in that it creates game plan decks as like the new meta and moves away from a 5 strategy. But like, how many copies of this card do you want to play in your deck? I can't really ever see myself casting this too often. Yeah, definitely a strange one. Like, I feel like everyone's bigging this card up massively, but I can't actually see any list wanting to play it themselves. Definitely a card that I've sort of flip-flopped on a little bit myself, but at the moment, I just feel like it's tough to justify. So thanks so much if you made it all the way through to the end. I'm really excited by Moonrise. I think there's some very cool Lunar lists that we can try out. The Lunar Phase deck feels like a lot of fun and very different from every other deck I've previously played in this game. I'm also excited by a Dense Fog suppression-based Lunar build. I'm really excited to try out a new like Foretell Solar deck because it felt like that really flopped in Daybreak. I'm excited to try out some Starbit Supernova as well. That card seems like a lot of fun. And I also think Frost got a huge upgrade, even if it's just from Snowlet. So there's a huge amount that we have to get testing. I've already made my pre-orders for this set. Let me know what your favorites are down below. Thanks so much, especially if you made it to the end, for watching, and I'll see you again for another video soon. Cheers.